The Prime Minister, David Cameron, and the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, are due to arrive in Birstall to pay tribute to Jo Cox, the MP brutally killed yesterday. Politicians and members of the public have placed flowers at her London home on the River Thames.
And people have been here in Birstall all morning, laying so many flowers to remember a very much loved local MP.
Well, there have been calls for police to talk to MPs about their security following the attack. We'll have the very latest also this lunchtime. 2 pioneering cancer drugs which help the immune system fight aggressive tumours are to be funded by the NHS in England. Will Russian athletes be allowed to compete at Rio after allegations of widespread doping? A decision's about to be made. And Tim Peake prepares to return to Earth after a remarkable 6 months in space.
What is your favourite button on the ISS and what does it do?
This button on this panel here actually opens up the door to outer space.
In the south, she won't get the new drug that could prolong her life, the 12-year-old Berkshire girl with cystic fibrosis. And the pop-up support groups that are helping people with learning difficulties to socialise.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, and the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, are heading to Birstall in West Yorkshire to pay their respects to the Labour MP Jo Cox, who was brutally murdered there yesterday. Dozens of people have laid flowers at a memorial close to where Mrs Cox was attacked outside her constituency surgery. A 52-year-old man who was arrested yesterday is still being questioned by police. Jane Hill is in Birstall for us. Jane.
Yes, good afternoon from this West Yorkshire market town. And I can't really overstate what an extremely emotional and moving morning it has been here. So many people flooding here to the memorial behind me all morning, wanting to lay flowers. Many of them still in tears, 24 hours after the attack happened and Jo Cox, the local Labour MP, lost her life. People of all ages, all backgrounds, many with children, some of them saying that Jo Cox wasn't even her MP, but they wanted to come here from neighbouring areas and make a stand. The report, first of all, will begin this hour from Sophie Long.
Our diversity, the thing that surprises me time and time again as I travel around the constituency is that we are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us.
Our friend, our future. Not words normally used to describe a politician, but Jo Cox was no normal politician. She died living her dream, representing her people, her way.
She were all for people of this town and helping other people, not just from this town, but people around the world. And it's just comes to this, and it's just so sad. It's terrible. It's just sickening. Then poor kids this morning wake up without their mum.
People here are just beginning to try to comprehend how a super smart woman who believed in a better world came to die such a brutal death outside her local library. They say they don't know how to express their grief, their sadness, so they lay flowers.
We're all very shocked and we feel like we want to do something but we don't know what to do. That's the problem.
Jo Cox's colleagues came to pay their respects. Politicians not normally lost for words, overwhelmed by what happened here. Others are asking why.
I just don't understand how someone could get to that point where he felt that were his only option, and I just don't understand. I just don't understand it, and obviously more will come out over time, but it's just at this minute in time it's just really, really difficult to soak in and try and understand what's gone on.
Awful. It's just devastating, obviously, for her family and colleagues, Labour colleagues, but as you can tell, as a Liberal Democrat, I'm distraught. Having an attack on somebody because they're an MP. You murder an MP because they're an MP. Where does that lead us?
Police are looking for the answer to those questions, trying to understand why the life of a loving wife and mother, a rising star who gave a voice to the vulnerable, was taken so brutally here in broad daylight. Sophie Long, BBC News, Birstall, West Yorkshire.
And the nature of what happened here 24 hours ago has, of course, raised questions about security. The Labour MP Rachel Reeves, for example, is one of those who said she has closed her constituency office today to bear in mind issues of security. We've been talking as well to the Labour MP Stephen Timms. He was attacked and stabbed 6 years ago, and he has been talking again about MPs and their security. This report from our political correspondent, Carol Walker.
Here at Westminster, the tributes continue. Friends and colleagues sharing their memories of Jo Cox. While the focus remains on the loss of such a young, passionate and talented MP, there are also concerns about security. It's emerged that Jo Cox had spoken to the police about malicious communications. A man was cautioned, though there's no suggestion this was connected with the attack which ended her life. Along the banks of the Thames, at the barge where she lived with her husband and children in London, more tributes. Police won't comment on whether they'd offered Mrs Cox extra security, but other MPs are already taking precautions.
I have closed my office today because, as well as the MPs, we also need to think about our staff. But I'm in no doubt that to do my job as a Member of Parliament, I can't stop doing advice surgeries. I wouldn't want to stop doing them.
MPs were offered extra security after several of them received death threats after the vote on military action in Syria. They can request additional measures for their homes or offices. The parliamentary authorities have reissued their security guidance and advised MPs to contact the police if they have any concerns about their safety.
Security around Parliament is tight, with armed police, airport-style screening and security cameras. But it's a different matter out in the constituencies, where MPs regularly hold open meetings and surgeries, just as Jo Cox had on the day she was killed. 6 years ago, another Labour MP was stabbed and injured in an attack at his office in East London.
After I was attacked, the police did say to me, would you like a metal arch, a metal detector on the way into the surgery? But the problem with that would be that it would make going to see your MP a pretty unpleasant experience, and none of us want that to happen. I want my constituents to come and talk to me, and I don't want to make it hard for them to do so.
A parliamentary committee recently found increasing concerns about security amongst many MPs, with social media leaving many women in particular vulnerable to online abuse.
No MP should fear that in doing their job they become subject to attack, verbal or physical, but too often we see that, and especially with women MPs, and it's unacceptable and it must not go on. And there are MPs who've been asking for extra support from police and are not getting it.
At Southwark Cathedral, a vigil for Jo Cox. Campaigning for the EU referendum is on hold as politicians of all parties mourn the loss of such a highly respected colleague. Carol Walker, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, a 52-year-old man is still under arrest. He has been named locally as Tommy Mayor, and people who know him have described him as quiet and with a passion for gardening. But there are also reports that he may have had a long series of problems with mental illness. Our correspondent Christian Fraser has more.
Were there signs Thomas Mayor had been planning this attack? Did neighbours or family miss clues that could have saved Jo Cox? Those who knew him, and some had known him 40 years, said he lived such a singular life they only ever spoke of gardening or the weather. Since his grandmother died 20 years ago, he'd lived alone, in isolation and with a history of mental illness. 6 years ago, he spoke to a local newspaper of how volunteering at a park near his home in Birstall had helped. I can honestly say, he said, it's done me more good than all the psychotherapy and medication in the world.
Extremely rare for people with mental health conditions involving obsessions and compulsions to be violent, let alone to act on those compulsions and focus their anger on other people. They're much more likely to punish themselves. However, living alone and feeling disconnected from society is fertile soil for extreme ideas, beliefs and hatred.
The tragedy is that Jo Cox was an active campaigner on loneliness, both at Westminster and in Birstall. Police will want to know whether she'd ever encountered Thomas Mair in the constituency or at her monthly surgery. Yesterday morning, Mair left his home at Lowood Lane and walked less than a mile to Market Street and the Birstall Library, where Jo Cox was meeting the public. He stabbed her outside the library with a foot-long hunting knife, kicked her and then shot her. An elderly witness who tried to intervene was injured before Mair walked away. 2 police officers pursued him through Birstall. He was eventually arrested in Rysdale Avenue.
I can't say exactly what it was, but I definitely put it in first is what he said when it was shouting. He shouted it at least twice.
There are reports Thomas Mair was linked to far-right extremism. The British far-right group Britain First denied he was ever a member. But as a young man, it said he was a past subscriber to the South African Patriot magazine, a neo-Nazi publication. And it's reported that for years he was a supporter of the National Alliance, one of the biggest neo-Nazi groups in the United States. An American group monitoring their activities has already published receipts which they say show that in 1999 he purchased a manual, a do-it-yourself book that included instructions on how to make a handgun.
Those receipts appear to be genuine, appeared to be in the weeks after the first neo-Nazi bombing spree that had been inspired by the internet in 1999, and appear to show instructions for making terrorist materials strictly using the internet and sort of homeware and easily purchasable materials.
Mental illness, extremism, misogyny, or all of it combined. It's too early to point to any motive, but what we do know is that very few people really knew Thomas Mair. Christian Fraser, BBC News.
Well, people continuing to arrive all lunchtime here, laying flowers. Let's get the thoughts of our correspondent Fiona Trott, because she's been here throughout. Fiona, you were at the vigil as well last night that was packed out at the local church. We can't really overstate just how emotional people still are. You can see it.
We've been watching them arrive here this morning, haven't we, with tears in their eyes. The number of floral tributes has just risen over the past couple of hours. And one card there just simply says, "To a Yorkshire Rose." She was one of them, wasn't she? She campaigned for the big international issues, but people here in Birstall will tell you that they could stop her in the street, they could share a problem with her. No issue was too small. She was campaigning for a local pedestrian crossing. That meant a lot to them, and as the Bishop of Huddersfield told us earlier on today, she was a woman with passion and a woman with compassion. A few moments ago, at about 5 to 1, a minute's silence was held, wasn't it, for everybody here in the market square. People have also lit candles to mark the 24 hours after she was attacked. It really has turned their lives upside down, because this huge police cordon is still in place, of course. I've overheard people here this morning trying to explain all this to their children, the children whose school was in a lockdown yesterday because police weren't entirely sure what they were dealing with at that stage. So trying to come to terms with this strange way of life at the moment, of course, trying to come to terms with the loss of their much-loved MP.
Fiona, thank you for now. Fiona Trott, and this is a tragedy that cuts across the political divide. Jo Cox, the first MP to be murdered, as the Yorkshire Post put it this morning, in the line of duty for more than 25 years. To that end, this town will be getting a visit soon from the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, and, as we say, the Prime Minister. More from here in Birstall to come. For now, Kate, back to you.
Jane, thank you. Now, in other news, 2 drugs which work together to shrink tumours in skin cancer have been approved for use by the NHS in England. In trials, a treatment called combination therapy shrank the most aggressive type of skin cancer in most patients. The move to approve the drugs is one of the fastest in NHS history and is likely to influence similar decisions elsewhere in the UK. Our health correspondent James Gallagher explains.
Last year, Sarah Maxwell was told her melanoma had spread to her lungs.
The news would have been a death sentence just a decade ago, but she took part in a pioneering trial to unleash her immune system. Now her latest scans can find no sign of cancer.
It's wonderful that it's going to be widely available. It's changed my life completely, from given a diagnosis with an incredibly poor prognosis to now having no signs of detectable cancer. I think we do have to be mindful that we don't have the long-term data, survival data yet, but there is hope where there was previously none.
She took a combination of ipilimumab and nivolumab. So how do these drugs work? Our immune systems attack hostile invaders, but cancer cells, which are corrupted versions of healthy tissue, can be difficult to spot. And some tumours even evolve a chemical handshake to disable the body's own defences. These drugs block that handshake and allow the immune system to kill the cancer. This is about more than just melanoma. Immunotherapy is one of the most exciting fields in all of cancer research. These drugs are being trialled in a wide variety of tumours. This really could transform treatment for all of us. This combination therapy was one of the fastest treatments ever approved for NHS use. But it's not a cure for cancer. Tumours disappear in only a fifth of patients, and the treatment does come with severe side effects. James Gallagher, BBC News.
Well, the time now then, 16 minutes past 1, and our main story this lunchtime. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, and the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, are due to arrive in Birstall, West Yorkshire, where the MP Jo Cox was murdered yesterday. And coming up, secrets of the deep. British scientists lead a mission to explore previously unknown ecosystems in the Atlantic.
In South today, we'll have the weekend weather forecast for you. Plus, an inquest opens into the death of a 6-year-old girl who was found next to the body of her dead father. And the pop-up support groups that are helping people with learning difficulties to socialise.
Now, this time tomorrow, the British astronaut Tim Peake will be back on planet Earth. His triumphant 6 months in space has seen him take part in more than 250 experiments, perform a spacewalk, run the London Marathon on a treadmill and receive an honour from the Queen. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh is in Moscow. He'll be covering his journey back home, and he sent us this report on some of the highlights of the mission and what kind of journey Tim will face tomorrow.
6 months ago, Tim Peake was on his way to space. Since then, he's inspired the nation. The main engines have now started. Very soon, Tim Peake will be on his way to the International Space Station. And there he goes!
And liftoff.
I can't believe someone from Westbourne Primary School is actually going up in space.
Tim, it's really cool seeing that Union Jack go outside.
There's been the science. There's been the inspiration.
My question is, what is your favourite button on the ISS and what does it do?
This button on this panel here actually opens up the door to outer space.
And the fun. But has it all been worthwhile?
So far, we've reached over 1 million children through this programme. And just from talking to people I've met on public transport, in the street, from my friends, through social media, you see that children up and down the country are really enjoying Tim's mission, and many, many of them have had the opportunity to follow his mission in schools.
Here in Moscow's National Exhibition Park, the Russians take huge pride in their achievements in space. And it's their engineers that are responsible for bringing Tim safely back to Earth. Now, they're all hugely experienced, but tomorrow morning they're going to be highly focused because re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and landing on solid ground will be the riskiest part of Tim's mission. In the morning, just before 7, the Soyuz spacecraft will detach from the space station and slowly be pushed away. It'll orbit the Earth for a couple of hours and then re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Outside, temperatures reach 2,000 degrees Celsius. The astronauts are protected by the heat shield, but pushing down on them, they feel huge gravitational forces.
Astronauts will be experiencing some Gs, actually up to 6 Gs, if it all goes as planned. If they go into ballistic reentry, then they could experience up to 8 or even 10 Gs, but hopefully it will not happen.
Then the capsule crashes to Earth. The flash is from thrusters that slow it down 1 second before it hits the Earth. They call this a soft landing, but it feels like a controlled car crash to the astronauts inside.
Into the vacuum of space to begin the first spacewalk of his career.
It'll be the end of Tim's epic adventure, until of course his next mission, if he's sent up into space again. Pallab Ghosh, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, you can watch live coverage of Tim Peake's return to Earth on the News Channel from just after 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. He's due to touch down at 10:15. Now, Russian athletes will find out later today whether they will be allowed to compete in the Rio Olympics following claims of widespread doping. Members of the world governing body of athletics, the IAAF, which is led by Lord Coe, are meeting in Vienna to make the decision. Our sports correspondent Richard Conway is there for us. Richard.
Well, that meeting is ongoing now at this hotel in Vienna, and for Russian athletes, well, it's a big day for them, and they will help determine if they can go for gold at Rio this summer. But for others, this is a key moment for sport, a key moment in the fight against doping, a moment perhaps when the integrity within sport is put to the test.
Russia was handed an indefinite suspension last November following an investigation into allegations of widespread doping, corruption and cover-ups. An independent report showed how a state-sponsored program had deep roots within Russian track and field. The fallout is still being felt. Australia's Jared Talent finished second in the men's 50-kilometre walk at the London 2012 Olympics. But last night he received a gold medal after his Russian rival was stripped of his win for doping.
Presenting an Olympic medal is always an honour, but more so on this occasion to be part of rectifying, in some way, the massive injustice perpetrated on Jared by a doping cheat and aided by a Russian anti-doping agency and Russian Athletics Federation that were rotten to the core.
At the centre of the storm is Lord Coe, the president of the IAAF. He is under renewed pressure following a BBC investigation which claims he may have misled Parliament over what he knew and when about Russian doping allegations.
Lord Coe, good morning. Can I ask, did you mislead Parliament?
New evidence has now come to light which shows Lord Coe was sent an email detailing allegations of a Russian doping cover-up 4 months before the scandal erupted in public. He says he forwarded the email to the Independent Ethics Commission of the IAAF without reading the attachment. The stakes are incredibly high, but even if Russian athletes remain suspended, the International Olympic Committee could still find a way for some of its stars to compete in Rio this summer. A compromise deal could be struck early next week, with Russian athletes allowed to compete if they can show a clean doping record over recent years. Critics, however, say evidence of a corrupt anti-doping system is enough to exclude the whole team in order to protect the integrity of the Games.
Now, in the last few hours, the Russian sports minister Vitaly Mutko has sent an open letter to Lord Coe and his IAAF colleagues, appealing to them to lift the ban, saying that Russia has done all it can to fulfill the criteria that was put upon them when the ban was imposed. So that decision will come within the next few hours. But meanwhile, the messaging from Moscow, from the Kremlin, is that if the ban is kept in place today, they will pursue all legal avenues to try and get Russian athletes back into international competition. The IOC, of course, will meet on Tuesday. So whatever happens here today, it is a key moment. But the argument is set to go on for the next few days, weeks, and possibly even months.
OK, Richard, thank you. A 94-year-old former Auschwitz prison guard has been convicted of being an accessory to the murder of 170,000 people at what could be one of Germany's last Holocaust trials. Reinhold Hanning was sentenced to 5 years in prison for his role in facilitating the slaughter at the death camp in Nazi-occupied Poland. Our correspondent Jenny Hill now reports.
For Reinhold Hanning, it was all in the past. He ran a dairy shop until he retired, but he had another career before that. His job at Auschwitz, prosecutors claim, to meet Jewish prisoners as they arrived at the camp and to escort some of them to the gas chamber. The Nazis systematically killed more than 1 million people at Auschwitz. Those who gave the orders are dead, but a recent court ruling means those who obeyed them can now be prosecuted, regardless of their role in the camp.
Nazi soldier barred my way with a...
70 years later, the survivors of Auschwitz have their day in court.
I cannot forgive the man. I don't feel I have the right to forgive for having my mother killed and father killed and tens of thousands of children and babies. Who am I to forgive in their name? I don't have that right.
Reinhold Hanning has admitted he feels deeply ashamed. In his words, he witnessed injustice and did nothing to stop it. The trial here in his hometown of Detmold is, of course, primarily about establishing his guilt, but it's also considered an opportunity for this country to re-examine its darkest hour. Few chances left. Reinhold Hanning is likely to be one of the last wartime Nazis to face justice. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Detmold.
Now, British scientists are leading an international mission to reveal the secrets of the deep Atlantic Ocean. The Atlas project, which involves teams from around the world, will spend 4 years exploring unknown ecosystems and measuring the changing ocean currents, as our science correspondent Victoria Gill explains.
Half a mile beneath the surface of the ocean and teeming with life. But this is far from tropical waters. It's the chilly Atlantic off Britain's north coast. It's just a glimpse of the hidden treasures that a new scientific endeavour is setting out to explore. The Atlas project is an international 4-year mission into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean.
Atlas is the biggest project looking at deep Atlantic ecosystems ever undertaken. By working through the plan that we have, we will have created a far better understanding of how ecosystems function in the deep ocean, and therefore be able to understand our impacts on them in the future.
Led by British scientists, the project involves 24 research institutions all around the North Atlantic. It will send 25 vessels out to explore a dozen deep sites throughout the ocean. As an island nation, our seas seem so familiar. The coast is so much a part of our lives. But you only have to go about 100 miles offshore before there are areas that we know very, very little about. And there are rich ecosystems out there already being impacted by climate change and that are already being explored by industries like fishing and oil and gas extraction.
We'll pick up the GPS every time it comes to the surface and it will send all the data back to Scotland.
As well as working from research vessels, scientists will use remote devices to take continuous measurements of ocean chemistry and the currents that affect our climate. These can remain at sea for months at a time, gathering information that researchers say is needed urgently.
Humans are having a very large impact on the planet, and until we make the fundamental measurements to understand how these things are sustained and evolving, then we've no chance of managing our natural resources.
The vast majority of the ocean remains unexplored, undiscovered. This mission aims to address that in the Atlantic before we exploit ecosystems we don't yet understand. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
Let's return to our main story now, and the arrival in Birstall of the Prime Minister, David Cameron, and the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, to pay their tributes and respects to the Labour MP, Jo Cox. Jo Cox, who was brutally murdered yesterday. Jane Hill.
Yes, much activity here in the Market Square in Birstall because, of course, lots and lots of people have gathered waiting to see the Prime Minister, the Labour, or the leader of the Labour Party as well. While we wait for them to arrive, they will be among so many people who have laid tributes here today. Let's speak, if we can, to Councillor Shabir Pandor, who's the leader of the Labour group on Kirklees Council. You knew Jo Cox very well. You're a councillor, in fact, for just the next door ward. What are your thoughts 24 hours on?
My thoughts is that I think the emotion that's going through in the community is still very raw. I think people are still coming to terms with what's happened. I think there's still a state of numbness. And I think, you know, once people know that David Cameron and Jeremy Corbyn are coming, I think they'll get a bigger reaction, I think, because it will be actually headline news, mainstream news, lunchtime news. But I think we need to keep things in perspective that, you know, this is about Jo's life, this is about remembering Jo, this is about making sure that her family, her friends get the support and the sympathy that they receive. And this is about making sure that, you know, we actually understand what Jo stood for. Jo stood for unity, peace. She did a lot of work on an international basis around humanitarian, around children, around poverty, and that's what made her so unique. And although that the media has come to battle in Birstall under these tragic circumstances, we need to actually remember what she was about. And that's why I would actually plead for the communities out there. There's a number of other events that are taking place throughout the constituency, one in Batley and well, actually a couple in Batley later on. And the messages I'm getting back from people is that she was such a massive personality, she was such a massive person, that she actually embraced people. She was like a magnet, she attracted people towards her. And I got to know her, as soon as I got to know her, she actually got to know my family, my daughter, my kids. And one very quick story, my daughter said, "Oh, Dad, can I have an interview? Or can I get an interview from Jo?" She was doing some work in school. So I said, "Look, honey, she's very, very busy. It's like 2 weeks before the election." So she said, I'll email her. She emailed her and she got a response straight away. And within a day, she actually managed to get an interview. She took it to her school and the school said, "Wow, that was really brilliant." So that's the kind of person she was. She was actually very, very detailed in terms of looking after everybody in the constituency. But she had a massive vision, which actually suited her personality around how to actually eradicate all the issues in the world. And her legacy must continue. Parliamentarians, politicians at a local level must realise what she stood for. And this is what today should be about. How do we actually take the work she did forward and how do we create a better world?
And it is so striking that a lot of what you say is reflected. I've read so many of the cards on these tributes behind us here today, and it gives the sweep of who Jo Cox was, because they talk about small local issues, pedestrian crossings, things that are vital to this community, and there are others that talk about, one man said, "You helped men, women and children all over the world." And that's her legacy.
That's her legacy. She was like lightning. 1 minute she'll be here, next minute she'll be there. And I'm quite a lightning type person as well. And when I was campaigning with her, when I was doing casework with her, when I was doing ward work with her, I was saying, "Jo, I thought I was very driven and energetic, but you actually run rings around me." But she was that kind of person. She was brilliant. She was such a personality that in a short space of time, she did so much work. There was so much more that she could give, but the tragic circumstances that came about was yesterday took her life away. That, you know, I think it was too soon. But having said that, you know, we must remember her in a positive light, and we must continue to actually make sure that we actually address the issue that she was so passionately, you know, wanting to address in the world. And it is a sad day. You know, I'm gonna get a bit emotional. I'm trying to hold myself back, but I think it's still sinking in. And the way I feel, I'm sure the people will feel the same way. That, you know, it's going to be a journey, a long journey, to actually people to understand what's happened.
Councillor, very many thanks indeed for your time. Councillor Shabir Pandoor, the leader of the Labour group on Kirklees Council. Much more from here to come. For now, Kate, back to you.
Thank you, Jane. It's time now then to look at the weather with Jay Wynn. Hello, Jay.
Hi there, Kate. Good afternoon. And the atmosphere has been very lively recently. We've seen some heavy showers, some thunderstorms, lightning, and even yesterday we saw this funnel cloud in Oxfordshire. If it had touched the ground, it would have been a tornado, but it didn't, so it was a funnel cloud. And we could well see further funnel clouds through the day today because it remains very unstable, particularly across the southern half of the UK. We've already seen a few thunderstorms and some heavy downpours, particularly so in the southeast. And that will be a focal point for some really intense rainfall this afternoon, thunder and lightning too. And in fact, we could well see some of those heavy showers into the Midlands as well. Another area of rain affecting the eastern side of Scotland. And underneath that, with a bit of a breeze, not a particularly pleasant day, only 11, 12 degrees in Aberdeen. Get into the western side of Scotland and it's that bit drier, Brighton, a bit warmer too. And parts of Northern Ireland, particularly the eastern side, enjoying some spells of sunshine, 17 or so degrees there in Belfast. Then as we head further south, we're into those heavy, potentially thundery showers across parts of Wales and southern England. Could see an awful lot of rain in a very short space of time. And there will be a little bit of dry and brighter weather in between those showers, but when those showers come along, you will know all about it. Could well be some transport disruption, particularly on the roads with a lot of spray and surface water, maybe even some localised flooding problems. And it's been a difficult week at Queen's for the tennis. Further interruptions are more than likely through the day today, but I think things will settle down as we go through the weekend. But through this evening, those thunderstorms rumble on across the southern half of the UK, at least for the first part of the night. They tend to fade away as that rain moves away from the eastern side of Scotland, drifts its way down the eastern side of England, becoming a bit lighter and more patchy in the process. Fair bit of low cloud across England and Wales overnight, maybe into Northern Ireland as well. But there'll be some clearer slots in Scotland and a bit of a chill in the air here, but for most places it's 12 or 13 degrees. Then as we get on into the weekend, this area of high pressure should settle things down, at least for the most part. Weather fronts lurking out west for later in the day on Sunday, but all in all through the weekend, there's a lot of dry weather for many places, light winds and at least a little bit of sunshine. Kate.
Jay, thank you very much indeed. Before we leave you, just a reminder then of our top story this lunchtime. The Prime Minister David Cameron, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn have arrived in Birstall, West Yorkshire to pay tribute to the MP Jo Cox, who was murdered in the town yesterday. More on their visit on the BBC News channel, of course, on BBC One. Now it's time for the news where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.